So about 2 years ago, I did a video that since that time has accumulated over 1 million views, which is kind of crazy to be honest. And I think that video touched upon such an essential point that really helped a lot of you guys to achieve a deeper level of reading, namely analytical reading. So in today's video, we're going to build on top of that video to give you guys some actionable understanding of how reading really works. And first of all, let's define an issue. Most people really think that they know how to read after they exit high school or university without realizing that, hey, reading is a skill that needs to be practiced again and again and again and again. And what typically happens is that once these people exit university or high school, they try to pick up a book, they try to focus on a paragraph, and they try to make sense of this book, but 9 out of 10 times they're going to walk away crying because perhaps for the first time they start to realize that the skills that you've gained from high school or university, they simply aren't sufficient enough for you to achieve that deeper level of reading that you dream of. So broadly speaking, I just want to anchor this one thought into your head before we get to the 4 levels of reading that schools and universities definitely haven't taught you yet. Otherwise you wouldn't be here watching this video. Reading is not a skill that you learn to show off to other people. This is why I get so sick of these booktubers, oh, I read 70 books this year, or like, look at my 100 book collection on my shelf, which is, frankly, it gets quite boring after a long while, to the point where you ask yourself, have you actually learned anything from reading 100 books, or are you merely reading them to show off? And for me, really, reading has one goal and one goal only, which is to remove the fear that you have to tackle more substantial material. You want to walk into a bookstore one day and not fear any of the titles that you want to get into. You'll no longer fear not having the focus to read the book. You won't fear the difficulty of the book, and at the same time, you're going to get really giddy and excited to read all these books that you've always wanted to read because you've mastered these 4 levels of reading. So I'm going to draw extensively from the Bible for all readers out there, called How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler, which is kind of a ironic title because here's a book on how to read a book. So in this succinct, witty, yet comprehensive book on how to read a book, Mortimer J. Adler laid out the 4 levels of reading. Layer number 1 is elementary reading, and this is the sort of skills that you learn from college and university. So after you've received a high school education in literacy, you are pretty comfortable with how to make sense out of a sentence. If you scroll down to the description right now, you should see some text. If you can make sense of those texts, if you can derive meaning from a paragraph or from a sentence, then you've basically mastered elementary reading. But the caveat here is that the skill tends to degrade over time when you don't practice on longer paragraphs. So essentially what we're seeing now in high schools and universities is that because learning had moved to a digital sphere, gradually we've seen a decline of the skill of elementary reading even, which is something that I'm desperately trying to correct one video at a time to try to teach you guys some of these skills so you can practice it at home in front of a fireplace. But let's just say you're a baller, you know how to read in this elementary way, and you know how to interpret whatever paragraph that your examiners throw at you. This is where most people stop. And this is why most people struggle with maintaining a reading habit. It's not because they don't have the right system. It's not really because they don't really know how to read per se, but it's because they've ignored the 3 other levels of reading covered by Mortimer J. Adler. The second level of reading is inspectional reading, and this is where a lot of people get into a lot of trouble. Inspectional reading tackles one of the most difficult problems to solve nowadays. Now, you walk into the bookstore, they typically have a pyramid of like new release books, and you think to yourself, there's like 40 books just on this one pyramid. How the hell am I going to have time to read every single one of these books? How do I even develop the filter to know what to read and what not to read? And this is where inspectional reading comes in, because there's simply too many books out there, and in fact, if you waste so much time on a wrong book, that's just deducting time that you have to read a book that's really going to make an impact on you. So inspectional reading is a simple process that takes you through a scanning process to determine what book is important, to give you a skeletal structure of the book to help you to determine whether or not you'd like to continue reading this book. Especially when a book is sufficiently difficult, having a broad landscape or having a broad inspection overview of the book is actually more important than getting stuck on a single chapter for 4 hours straight. So you want that landscape, and when you're convinced that you've gained a pretty good inspectional overview, here's the third layer, which is analytical reading. This is the process of parsing the actual arguments in a book. What is the author trying to say? What are the supporting arguments to back up the main claim? And are there any claims that are kind of dodgy, or are there any brilliant claims that you'd like to note down in your commonplace book? But this is also the stage of reading where you gain the most amount of insight into what the book is about, into how to agree and disagree with the author, and into how to make summary notes out of a chapter. And because this is such a selective process, your reading will be a lot more intense. And then again, if you want to learn how to do analytical reading, click the video right here. It's a pretty short video, 6 minutes. And once you've gathered some really important insights from your close reading and from your analytical reading, what do you do with those insights? And that's going to lead us to the fourth stage of reading, which Mortimer and J. Adler considered to be the ultimate goal of reading. And this is the syntopical stage of reading. And syntopical here is basically a Neo-Latin word for a collection of many topics. So essentially, a book is a collection of observations, research, and opinions of an author. And for you to gain the most amount of perspective on a certain topic, and for you to gain the most amount of objectivity, you kind of need to build a system for you to compare the viewpoints of multiple authors and multiple viewpoints through building what's called a syntopicon. So rather than building your notes based on what book you've read, for example, I have Byung-Chul Han's Good Entertainment here. So rather than creating a whole page of notes on one book, syntopical reading demands you to tease out specific themes from the book and to compare the viewpoints of this author with another book. For example, in this book, Han talked about the value of education. And over here, maybe in another book, E.B. White talked about the value of writing and education. So there we have a common topic, which is education. But how do you develop a system to contrast and compare those viewpoints for the sake of gaining a more elevated point to inspect this topic? And that is the process of developing syntopical reading. You're able to synthesize all these viewpoints that you've gained from analytical reading into an integrated system where you can compare and contrast different perspectives from different authors. And this is really where critical thinking comes in. If you're able to hop between different perspectives, that prevents you from getting trapped in a cult of personalities or getting trapped in one specific author's aura, or just in general having a more integrated view of the world, which I think is the whole shooting match with reading. You read to become more well-informed and more well-rounded and more able to jump between different perspectives. And that, ladies and gentlemen, comprises the 4 layers of reading that your universities and your high schools probably did not teach you. So in the future, I definitely want to make more videos on each one of these layers more in depth to give you guys tools and strategies and even practical actions for you to deepen your reading experience. And I'm currently working on something that's going to help you build a syntopicon, because I know it's quite a complicated thing to build. So I'm very excited to talk more about this syntopicon that I'm building. And stay tuned for more updates. And I'll see you back here next Wednesday for some more food for thought. Robin Waldun here, and I hope that you're having a great evening, great morning, great afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for watching this video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.